"I'm freezing, let me in!" That's what the Apache woman begged the mountain man, and folks still whisper what she offered next. "I'll give you sons." But no one saw what truly crossed that threshold that night. Not just a woman, half dead from snow, but something older than blood and heavier than guilt. He's a man running from the past. She's a stranger with nothing left but the fire in her eyes. Now the snow's falling harder, the law's coming fast, and the line between mercy and danger is vanishing with the tracks. What did he really let in? And what will it cost him to keep it? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The wind howled through the timbers of Elias Wren's cabin like a hungry wolf. He stirred the thin bean soup warming over his hearth, watching the flames dance beneath the dented tin pot. His stomach growled, reminding him it had been hours since his last meal. The cabin's single room felt smaller in winter when the snow pressed in from all sides. The spoon clinked against the pot's bottom as he lifted it for a taste. Too bland. Same as yesterday. Same as tomorrow would be. He reached for the salt pork hanging from a rafter, planning to cut off a sliver to add some flavor. That's when he heard it, a pounding at his door, desperate and weak. Elias froze, knife in hand. Nobody came up this high in the Sangre de Cristo range, especially not in January's bitter grip. The knocking came again, fainter this time. He set down his knife and grabbed his rifle. Years of scouting had taught him caution. "Who's there?" he called out, voice rough from disuse. A woman's voice answered, barely above a whisper. "Please, I'm freezing." Elias cracked open the door, rifle ready. The sight before him stole his breath. An Apache woman stood swaying in the doorway, her dark eyes glazed with exhaustion. Snow crusted her clothes and hair. Her lips had taken on a bluish tinge. "Let me in," she pleaded, her words slurring. "I'll give you sons." Before he could respond, her knees buckled. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, his rifle clattering to the floor. Her skin felt like ice through her frozen clothing. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, kicking the door shut against the howling wind. He carried her to his rope bed, her body limp as a rag doll in his arms. Her coat was stiff with ice, and her fingers were dangerously cold when he checked them. Working quickly, Elias peeled off her frozen outer layers. He tried to be respectful, leaving her inner clothing in place. From a chest in the corner, he pulled out his prized buffalo robes, wrapping her in the thick fur. The hide still carried the musky scent of the great beasts he'd once hunted. He added more wood to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. The woman's breathing was shallow but steady. In the firelight, he could see her face clearly for the first time. High cheekbones, strong features, and worry lines around her eyes that made him wonder what hardships had carved them there. Elias sat on the hearth, his soup forgotten. Her words echoed in his mind. "I'll give you sons." The phrase stirred something in him, a mix of confusion and an old, buried pain. His hand unconsciously moved to touch the Bible on the shelf beside him. Sarah's Bible, untouched since they'd laid her in the ground 3 winters past. The woman stirred slightly, mumbling something in Apache that he couldn't understand. Elias watched her face, trying to make sense of this strange turn of events. What was she doing up here alone? Why had she made such an odd offer? The mountains held many secrets, but this one puzzled him more than most. He checked her fingers again, relieved to feel some warmth returning to them. The blue tinge was fading from her lips, replaced by a more natural color. Her breathing had deepened, though she remained unconscious. The wind rattled the cabin's shutters, reminding him of the brutal cold outside. If he hadn't opened the door... He pushed the thought away. No use dwelling on what might have been. Instead, he found himself studying her face again. There was a dignity there, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of strength. He'd known many Apache during his scouting days, had respected their resilience and skill. But those days were behind him now, buried under years of solitude and regret. Elias added another log to the fire, watching the sparks rise up the chimney. The woman's presence had already changed something in his cabin. The familiar silence felt different, charged with possibility and uncertainty. He wasn't sure he liked it. His eyes drifted to the cross carved into his cabin wall, then back to his unexpected guest. "What am I supposed to do with you?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. The soup pot bubbled over, startling him from his thoughts. He moved it off the fire, but remained seated on the hearth. Sleep was out of the question now. He would watch over her through the night, this mysterious woman who had stumbled out of the storm and into his carefully ordered world. Her words continued to echo in his mind. "I'll give you sons." Such a strange offering, loaded with meaning he couldn't yet understand. As the night deepened and the fire crackled, Elias Wren sat guard, waiting for dawn and the answers it might bring. Dawn crept over the mountains like a tired traveler. Grey clouds hung low, pressing against the cabin's snow-laden roof. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing coals, casting a soft orange light across the room. Elias stirred from his vigil by the hearth, his bones creaking from sitting all night. He glanced at his unexpected guest, still wrapped in buffalo robes. Her breathing was stronger now, and color had returned to her cheeks. As if sensing his gaze, Tyenne's eyes fluttered open. She looked around the cabin, taking in her surroundings with careful attention. Her dark eyes settled on Elias, watchful but not fearful. "You saved my life," she said, her voice clearer than the night before. Elias nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her tone. "Couldn't leave you out there." He stood, joints protesting. "I'll fix something warm to eat." He moved to the wood stove, aware of her eyes following his movements. From a canvas sack, he scooped yellow cornmeal into a pot of water. The familiar routine of cooking helped steady his nerves. "Much obliged," she said, slowly sitting up. She kept the buffalo robe wrapped around her shoulders like armor. While the cornmeal mush bubbled and thickened, Elias snuck glances at his guest. She sat with perfect posture, despite her ordeal. There was something regal in the way she held herself, even wrapped in borrowed robes. He spooned the hot mush into 2 tin bowls and handed one to her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and he quickly pulled back. "What brings you up this high?" he asked, settling onto his wooden stool. "Dangerous country for anybody traveling alone." Tyen took a careful spoonful of mush before answering. "I search for land my grandfather spoke of. Sacred Valley, north of here. Good water, sheltered from winds." Her words were precise, carefully chosen. "He said our people lived there before the soldiers came." The mention of soldiers made Elias's shoulders tense. He stared into his bowl, memories threatening to surface. "Long way to travel alone," he said gruffly. "The path chooses the walker," she replied, "not the other way." They ate in silence for a moment. The wind whistled through the cabin's chinks, making the lamp flame dance. Finally, Elias cleared his throat. "About what you said last night." He paused, uncomfortable. "About giving sons." Tyen met his eyes steadily. "A man who opens his door in winter is a man a woman can plant her future in." She set down her empty bowl. "I do not seek pity or charity. I seek land for legacy." Her words struck him like a physical blow. How long had it been since anyone had spoken to him of future or legacy? Since Sarah died, his world had shrunk to this cabin, these mountains, and memories he tried to forget. "Legacy ain't always what we expect it to be," he muttered. "No," she agreed, "but it must be tended like a garden, even in winter." Evening came early, as it always did in winter. Elias added wood to the fire while Tyen arranged her bed of buffalo robes near the hearth. The domesticity of it felt strange after so many years alone. When she was settled, Elias reached for Sarah's Bible. The leather binding was smooth from years of his wife's hands. He hadn't opened it since her passing, but tonight something drew him to its pages. The lamplight was just bright enough to read by. He turned the pages carefully, stopping at random. His eyes fell on a passage about strangers and angels. The words blurred as his mind wandered. Across the room, Tayen's breathing grew steady with sleep. Elias looked up from the Bible to study her face in the firelight. There was something both familiar and foreign about her presence in his cabin. It stirred up feelings he'd thought long buried, not of romance or desire, but of purpose. He closed the Bible, his thoughts unsettled. Tomorrow would bring decisions he wasn't ready to face. For now, he let the fire's warmth and his guests' quiet breathing fill the cabin's darkness. The wind moaned outside, reminding him of the vast wilderness beyond his walls. Somewhere out there lay a valley that called to Tayen, just as these mountains had once called to him. He understood the pull of such places, even if he didn't understand the woman herself. Sleep eluded him as his mind turned over her words again and again. Legacy, future, sons. Such heavy words for a man who'd chosen solitude as his penance. He watched the flames dance until his eyes grew heavy, the Bible still resting in his lap. The morning sun glinted off fresh snow as Elias and Tayen made their way down the mountain trail. His old mule, Jenny, plodded steadily ahead, leaving deep hoofprints in the pristine white. The past 2 days of rest had restored color to Tayen's cheeks, though she still kept the borrowed buffalo robe pulled tight around her shoulders. Elias guided Jenny around a sharp bend. San Felipe Junction's just past those cottonwoods. Ain't much, but they got what we need. Tayen nodded, her eyes taking in every detail of the landscape. The land remembers its people, she said softly, even when others forget. The small town came into view, a scatter of wooden buildings dusted with snow. Smoke rose from chimneys into the crystal-clear air. As they approached, Elias noticed curtains twitching, faces peering out windows. Word would spread fast about the stranger he'd brought to town. They tied Jenny outside Hawkins' general store. The bell above the door jangled as they entered, and conversation stopped dead. Mrs. Hawkins froze mid-sentence, her hand clutching a bolt of calico. 2 ranch wives backed away from the counter, gathering their children close. "Morning," Elias said gruffly, moving toward the counter. "Need supplies." Old man Hawkins adjusted his spectacles, eyes darting between Elias and Tayen. "Been a spell since we seen you, Ren." His voice carried forced cheerfulness. "What can I get you? Coffee, sugar, flour." Elias laid out his list while Tayen stood quietly near the door, dignity wrapped around her like the buffalo robe. "And warm clothes for the lady." Whispers rustled through the store like dry leaves. Mrs. Hawkins disappeared into the back room, returning with a bundle of second-hand clothing. She set it on the counter without meeting anyone's eyes. The bell jangled again. Sheriff Merrick Dunn filled the doorway, his badge catching the winter light. His hand rested casually on his holstered Colt Navy revolver. "Ren," he said, voice hard as river rocks. "Might have a word." Elias nodded to Tayen to stay put and followed Dunn outside. The sheriff's breath steamed in the cold air. "Got a wire from Fort Garland 2 days back," Dunn said, looking for an Apache woman. "Fled during relocation." His pale eyes fixed on Elias. "Matches your friend's description?" "She's under my care," Elias said firmly. "Found her half frozen in the snow." Inside Hawkins' store, Tayen moved with quiet purpose toward a stack of trade goods near the back wall. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on something beneath a pile of blankets. With careful movements, she reached down and pulled out a weathered bundle wrapped in deer hide, her hands trembling slightly. "This was here," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "All this time." Elias stepped closer, keeping one eye on the door where Sheriff Dunn still lingered outside. "What you got there?" Tayen unwrapped the hide with reverent care, revealing yellowed papers inside. The edges were worn, but the writing remained clear, a territorial deed, its official seal still visible in the corner. She handed it to Elias, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My grandfather's mark," she said, pointing to a careful X at the bottom. "The valley he loved, north of here, where 3 creeks join. The army never recorded it, but a territorial clerk made it proper." Her finger traced the notary's elaborate signature. "I heard stories of this paper since I was small. Grandfather hid it here before they took us south." Elias studied the document carefully, his weathered hands gentle with the fragile paper. The deed was genuine. Dated 1863, properly witnessed and notarized. His throat tightened as he realized what this meant. This wasn't just some wild quest she'd invented. She had real claim to land that had been wrongfully taken. "Your boy," he said softly, remembering her earlier words about sons. "He never made it to see this valley." Tyenne's composure cracked for just a moment. She turned away, facing the shelf of dry goods, her shoulders stiff with grief. "The soldiers moved us fast. Too fast for little ones. No proper food, no rest." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "He burned with fever. I could not save him." The words hit Elias like physical blows. His own memories surged up, giving orders, hurrying people along, telling himself he was just following commands. How many children had suffered because of men like him? "I was a scout," he confessed, his voice rough. "For the army. Helped them move folks south." The shame of it burned in his chest. One mission went bad. Real bad. Peaceful families left with nothing. Winter coming on. He swallowed hard. Never knew how many made it through. Tyenne turned back to face him, her dark eyes holding his. There was pain there, old and deep, but something else too. Understanding, maybe. Or at least the wisdom to know that past sins didn't have to poison the present. "The dead are dead," she said simply, "but the living must find their way forward." Elias carefully rewrapped the deed and handed it back to her. She tucked it securely inside her clothing, close to her heart. They gathered their supplies in silence: flour, coffee, the bundle of used clothing. Mrs. Hawkins rang up their purchases without a word, her eyes carefully avoiding them both. Outside, Sheriff Dunn watched them load the supplies onto Jenny's back. His face was hard, suspicious, but he made no move to stop them. The winter sun was already sliding toward the mountains as Elias helped Tyenne onto the mule-drawn sled he'd brought down for the return journey. The trip back to the cabin was quiet, broken only by the soft shush of runners on snow and Jenny's steady breathing. But it wasn't an uneasy silence. Something had shifted between them, some wall of distrust crumbling like spring ice. Elias found himself watching Tyyenne's profile against the darkening sky, seeing not just a burden he'd taken on, but a woman of remarkable strength. Someone who had lost everything, but still held on to hope, still believed in the power of a promise made on paper and sealed with a father's mark. The buffalo robe was wrapped tight around her shoulders, and she held herself straight despite the cold. In the gathering dusk, with snow-laden pines sliding past, she looked like she belonged here, not as some fugitive or unwanted stranger, but as part of the mountain itself, connected to this land by bonds deeper than any government deed could capture. They reached the cabin just as the first stars were pricking through the purple evening sky. Elias helped her down from the sled, noting how she moved more surely now, no longer weak from her near freezing. She paused at the cabin door, looking back at him. "Thank you," she said simply, "for listening, for believing." Elias nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He busied himself with unhitching Jenny and storing the supplies, letting the familiar work steady his troubled thoughts. When he finally entered the cabin, Tyenne had already stoked the fire to blazing life. Its warm light filled the small space, pushing back the darkness and the cold, much like her presence was beginning to push back the lonely shadows in his heart. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the mountain peaks. Elias stood in the yard, surveying his old trapper's sled with a critical eye. The wooden runners needed fresh pine tar, and several leather straps had grown brittle from disuse. Inside the cabin, He could hear Tayen's quiet movements as she worked on her own preparations. He dragged the sled into the thin winter sunlight, gathering his tools. The familiar scent of melting pine tar filled the air as he worked, carefully coating the runners until they gleamed. His hands remembered the motions, though it had been years since he'd used the sled for anything more than hauling firewood. Through the cabin's small window, he watched Tayen sitting cross-legged by the fire, piecing together scraps of wool into a sturdy blanket. Her needle flashed in the firelight, each stitch precise and careful. She had a way about her work that spoke of patience, of building something lasting from fragments others might discard. The morning passed in shared silence, broken only by the scrape of his tools and the soft whisper of her thread through wool. By midday, the sled was nearly ready. Elias tested each repaired strap, ensuring it would hold under the weight of their supplies. 3 days wasn't much time to prepare, but the weather was holding fair, unusual for January in these mountains. Tayen emerged from the cabin, the completed blanket folded over her arm. She nodded approval at his work on the sled, then gestured toward the small rise behind the cabin. "Your wife's place?" she asked softly. Elias's throat tightened. "Yes, Sarah's been there 12 years now." Tayen reached into a pocket and withdrew a small braid of sweetgrass, its pale strands woven tight. Without a word, she walked up the snowy path to the simple wooden cross that marked Sarah's grave. Elias watched from the yard, something catching in his chest as Tayen knelt in the snow. She placed the sweetgrass at the base of the cross, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer. The gesture was so natural, so respectful, not asking permission, but offering honor freely given. Elias found himself blinking hard against unexpected tears. Meanwhile, in San Felipe Junction, Sheriff Dunn stood in the telegraph office, reading a yellow slip of paper with growing satisfaction. The message was clear: $500 for the return of one Apache woman, answering to Tayen, wanted for questioning at Fort Garland. His fingers drummed against his gun belt as he considered his next move. Within the hour, he had 4 men gathered, ranch hands and drifters eager for easy money. They checked their weapons and gathered supplies, preparing to ride at first light. Dunn's face was hard as granite as he gave his instructions. "We bring her in alive," he ordered. "Army wants her breathing." Back at the cabin, evening settled over the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Tayen lit a small oil lamp and knelt on her blanket near the hearth. Her prayers came soft but clear in the Apache tongue, mixing with occasional phrases of English. Words learned from her missionary husband, now part of her own sacred language. Elias sat at his rough-hewn table, watching. The familiar words of the Lord's Prayer drifted through her other petitions, bridging worlds he'd thought forever separated. Without quite meaning to, he found himself moving to kneel beside her. Tayen opened her eyes, regarding him with gentle surprise. "You wish to pray together. I reckon I'm a mite rusty," he admitted. "Been a long time since I opened Sarah's Bible for more than dust wiping." "The Creator hears all hearts," she said simply, "even the rusty ones." She began again, this time in English. "Our Father, who art in heaven." Elias's voice joined hers, uncertain at first, then gaining strength. The familiar words felt different somehow, shared with someone who spoke them not from duty but from deep belief. When they finished, Tayen remained kneeling, her face peaceful in the lamplight. "Your wife's spirit knows peace," she said softly. "I felt it there, by her cross. She would want you to find yours." Elias stood slowly, joints creaking. Reckoned she would at that. He moved to the window, looking out at the starlit snow. "Sarah always said I carried too much darkness inside, said I needed to let the light back in. Then perhaps that is why the Creator guided my steps here," Tayen said, rising to tend the fire, "to help bring that light." The flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls as they prepared for sleep. Tomorrow would bring more preparations, more decisions to be made. But something had shifted between them, a bridge built not of words, but of shared faith and mutual respect. As Elias lay down on his narrow bunk, he realized he felt lighter somehow, as if some long-carried burden had begun to ease. The stars still glittered in the dark sky when Elias and Tyen loaded the last supplies onto the sled. Their breath formed white clouds in the frigid air as they secured leather straps around bundles of food, tools, and blankets. The two mules stamped their hooves impatiently, their harnesses jingling softly in the pre-dawn silence. "Snow's deep," Elias muttered, testing the powder with his boot. "Going to be slow going." Tyen nodded, adjusting her wool scarf. "The Creator gives us the path we need, not always the path we want." They set out just as the eastern sky began to pale. Elias took point, breaking trail through knee-deep snow, while Tyen guided the mules from behind. The animals struggled in the powdery drifts, their strong legs plunging deep with each step. Progress was measured in yards rather than miles. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed above the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. Elias called a brief halt, checking the mules' legs for signs of strain. While Tyen offered them handfuls of grain, he surveyed the landscape ahead. "See those tracks there?" He pointed to faint depressions in the snow. "Rabbit been through here, maybe 2 hours ago. Notice how the prints bunched together?" Tyen studied the pattern. It was running. That's right. Elias knelt down, brushing away some snow. "See how the front prints are behind the back ones? That's how you can tell. And look here." He indicated a subtle depression under a fallen log. Likely a den entrance. They dig down, make themselves a warm spot protected from wind and predators. Throughout the day he shared more tracking wisdom, how to read the age of prints, spot feeding areas, recognize signs of water nearby. Tyen absorbed it all with quiet intensity, asking thoughtful questions that showed her quick grasp of woodcraft. When darkness approached, they made camp beneath a stand of tall spruce trees. The branches provided some shelter from the wind, and Elias showed Tyen how to weave additional boughs into a crude lean-to. Soon they had a small fire going, its warmth welcome after the long day of travel. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and corn cakes. Tyen stared into the flames, her face thoughtful in the flickering light. "Before my son died," she said softly, "I had a dream. I saw myself teaching children, not just my own, but others too. There was a valley with clean water and safe hills. The children learned both old ways and new. They grew strong, knowing who they were." She touched the medicine pouch at her neck. "Even after we lost him on the march south, I held on to that dream. It gave me strength to keep walking." Elias poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks spiral up into the darkness. "Been a long time since I dreamed anything," he admitted. "Not since Sarah passed. Seems like all my dreams got buried with her." "Dreams do not die," Tyen said. "They sleep, like seeds in winter earth. They wait for the right season to grow again." A sudden rustle in the trees made them both freeze. Elias reached slowly for his rifle, eyes scanning the darkness beyond their fire's light. Tyen's hand went to her knife. The rustling came closer. Elias raised his rifle, finger steady on the trigger. A flash of red fur darted between two trees, just a fox, likely drawn by the scent of their food. They both let out held breaths, but Elias didn't fully relax. Something about the night felt wrong, as if unseen eyes watched from the shadows. "We should sleep in shifts," he said, keeping his voice low. "I'll take first watch." Tyen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Wake me at midnight. The stars will tell me when." She wrapped herself in the blanket she'd sewn, leaving Elias alone with his thoughts and the dying fire. He kept his rifle close, ears straining for any sound that didn't belong to the night forest. The fox's visit had stirred something in his gut, a tracker's instinct that rarely led him wrong. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the snow. Overhead, the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, bright and cold as diamonds. Elias found his mind returning to Tayan's words about dreams sleeping like seeds. He wondered if perhaps his own dreams weren't dead after all, just buried deep under years of guilt and solitude, waiting for the right season to grow again. A night bird called from somewhere in the darkness. Elias added another small branch to the fire, keeping it low but steady. The sense of being watched hadn't left him, though he'd seen no sign of pursuit. Still, decades in the wilderness had taught him to trust his instincts. Tomorrow they would need to be especially careful, take paths less obvious, watch their back trail more closely. He glanced at Tayan's sleeping form, peaceful despite the hard ground and cold air. Her strength amazed him, not just physical endurance, but the deeper strength of someone who had lost everything yet still held on to hope. Perhaps that was what dreams were really for, he thought, not just visions of what might be, but anchors to hold on to when the world tried to sweep you away. After 4 days of hard travel through deep snow and rocky passes, Elias and Tayan crested a final ridge. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the valley below. Tayan gasped, her gloved hand flying to her mouth. The hollow spread before them like a gift from heaven. South-facing slopes caught the winter sun, their snow already beginning to melt in protected pockets. A clear spring bubbled from dark rocks, its waters flowing unfrozen even in January's grip. Pine and spruce ringed the upper edges, while the valley floor showed signs of rich soil beneath its white blanket. "Grandfather spoke true," Tayan whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "This is the place." Elias's experienced eye took in the signs of game. Rabbit tracks crisscrossed the snow, deer paths wound through the trees, and turkey scratches marked the bark of several pines. The spring meant water year-round, and the southern exposure would mean earlier planting come spring. It was good land, the kind a person could build a life on. Near the spring stood a sod cabin, its roof partially collapsed, but its walls still standing strong. The sight of it brought tears to Tayan's eyes. She walked toward it slowly, reverently, her hand outstretched to touch the rough walls her grandfather had built decades ago. "I never thought." She traced the weathered logs that framed the doorway. "In my dreams, yes, but to see it with my own eyes." Elias stepped inside, testing the floorboards with his weight. "Structure's sound," he said. "Roof needs work, but the walls are good. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." "My grandfather," Tayan said proudly. "He learned from Mexican traders, then taught others. He believed in taking the best from all ways." They spent the remainder of the daylight hours clearing debris from inside the cabin. Tayan swept the packed earth floor with a pine branch, while Elias patched the worst holes in the roof with canvas from their supplies. Together they cleaned the stone hearth, Elias noting how carefully it had been constructed. "Good chimney," he said, peering up the flue. "Draws well. Won't smoke us out." While Tayan arranged their bedrolls, Elias set snares in the nearby brush. Within an hour, he had 2 plump rabbits. He cleaned them efficiently, saving the fur for later use. Tayan gathered wild onions that had somehow survived beneath the snow, along with pine needles for tea. The rabbit stew bubbled fragrantly in Elias's iron pot, the meat tender and the broth rich with wild onions. They ate in comfortable silence, sharing the first real meal they'd had in their new shelter. The fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for the first time in days, they felt truly warm. After the meal, Tayan took out her grandfather's deed, handling the weathered paper with careful fingers. She knelt before the hearth, lifted a loose stone, and gently placed the document underneath. "This place remembers," she whispered in Apache, then repeated it in English. "The land knows who it belongs to. The water knows. The trees know." She touched the stone as she replaced it. "Now the heart of this house knows too." Elias watched her from his place by the fire, understanding in his eyes. He'd seen enough of the world to know that some places held memory deeper than paper could record. This hollow felt like such a place, as if it had been waiting all these years for Tyen's return. They barred the door securely before settling down to sleep. The lamp burned low, casting a gentle glow across the cabin's interior. Through the holes they hadn't yet patched, stars winked like distant fires. "Tomorrow we can start proper repairs," Elias said, checking his rifle one last time before laying it within easy reach. "Get this place weather-tight before the next storm." "Yes," Tyen agreed softly. "Tomorrow we begin making it live again." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Thank you, Elias, for helping me find my way here." Elias nodded in the darkness, not trusting himself to speak. The joy in Tyen's eyes when she'd first seen the hollow had stirred something in him, something he'd thought long buried. It felt like watching a flower push through snow, defiant and beautiful and full of promise. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Inside the cabin, Tyen's breathing grew steady with sleep. Elias lay awake a while longer, listening to the night sounds of their new home. Home. The word came naturally, though he hadn't meant to think it. But that's what this place felt like, he realized. Not just shelter, but home. The lamp flame flickered and went out, leaving only starlight and the red glow of embers. Beneath the hearthstone, Tyen's grandfather's deed lay protected, anchoring their claim to this peaceful hollow. Above it, two people who had lost everything began to dream of what might grow in this protected valley, where clean water flowed and game ran plenty, and hope had finally found good soil in which to root. For 3 precious days, Elias and Tyen fell into a simple rhythm of life in the hollow. Each sunrise brought new tasks and small joys as they worked to make the cabin livable. The sound of Elias's axe rang through the crisp mountain air as he split logs for repairs, while Tyen gathered dried grasses to patch the roof's remaining holes. They worked side by side to rebuild the cabin's crumbling walls, Tyen showing Elias the traditional method her grandfather had used, laying stones in a careful pattern that would hold against the mountain winds. Her hands moved with certainty, remembering skills passed down through generations. During breaks from their labor, they ventured into the surrounding forest. Tyen taught Elias how to find the sweetest pine nuts, showing him which cones would yield the best harvest. "See how the scales are spread wide?" she explained, holding up a perfect specimen. "That means they're ready." They built a fire ring outside the cabin, arranging stones in a circle just as the sun began to set each day. Tyen would sing while preparing their evening meals, sometimes Apache melodies, sometimes hymns she had learned from missionaries. Her voice carried through the hollow, clear and strong, making even the simplest stew feel like a feast. Elias found himself smiling more and more. The first time it happened, the expression felt strange on his face, like a tool long unused. But Tyen's quiet joy was infectious, and soon the smiles came easier. He caught himself humming along to her songs, something he hadn't done since Sarah passed. In the evenings, they shared stories by the fire. Tyen spoke of her grandfather's wisdom and her mother's healing ways. Elias, gradually opening up, told tales of his early days in the mountains, of the beauty he'd seen and the lessons he'd learned. They read from Sarah's old Bible, taking turns with the passages. Tyen's English was clear and precise, though sometimes she would translate verses into Apache, the ancient words taking on new meaning in her native tongue. On the 3rd morning, Tyen presented Elias with a gift, a beautifully beaded leather sheath for his hunting knife. "I worked on it while you slept," she said, watching as he ran his fingers over the intricate pattern of blue and white beads. "The design means protection through change." Elias held the sheath carefully, touched by the hours of work represented in each tiny bead. That evening, after much thought, he brought out Sarah's Bible, the one he'd been reading from each night. The leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling, the pages marked with his late wife's neat notes in the margins. "I want you to have this," he said, holding it out to Tyen. Sarah would have wanted it to be used by someone who truly understands its worth. Tyann accepted the Bible with both hands, a gesture of deep respect. "I will honor her memory," she promised, touching the cover gently, and the wisdom she left within these pages. As they sat by the fire that night, Elias watched Tyann reading from Sarah's Bible, her finger tracing the lines just as his wife used to do. Something settled in his heart, a certainty he hadn't felt in years. The hollow was coming alive again, and not just through their physical labor. He found himself imagining a future here, one where the cabin would be more than just shelter, one where Tyann's presence would be permanent. The words formed in his mind, but he held them back, wanting to choose the right moment. The fire crackled softly, and outside, snow began to fall, big, gentle flakes that drifted down like feathers. Tyann closed the Bible and leaned back against her bedroll, her eyes growing heavy. "It's good here," she murmured sleepily, "like the land itself is healing." Elias nodded, adding another log to the fire. They drifted off to sleep as the snow continued its quiet dance outside, covering the hollow in a fresh blanket of white. But the peace of their mountain sanctuary was not to last. The next morning, as dawn's first light crept over the eastern ridge, Elias stepped outside to check their rabbit snares. He stopped short at the sight of tracks in the new snow, horse tracks, multiple sets, circling the cabin at a distance. His body tensed, years of mountain instinct taking over. He scanned the tree line carefully, noting broken branches and disturbed snow. Somewhere in the surrounding forest, riders were watching. The tracks were fresh, made since the snowfall stopped before dawn. Elias stood very still, listening to the morning sounds. A jay's alarm call rang out from the north, then silence. Too much silence. His hand moved slowly to the knife in its new beaded sheath, while his eyes continued their careful survey of the hollow. The peace they had found here now felt as fragile as the fresh snow beneath his feet. The morning silence broke with the thunder of hooves. Sheriff Dunn and 2 deputies emerged from the tree line, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. Elias stood his ground near the cabin door, his rifle lowered but ready. The fresh snow crunched under the horses' hooves as they approached. "That's far enough," Elias called out, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. Inside the cabin, he heard Tyann moving quietly. Sheriff Dunn reined his horse to a stop 20 paces away. His badge caught the weak winter sunlight. "Step aside, Wren. We're here for the Apache woman." "She's got papers," Elias said. "A legal deed to this land. There's nothing here for you, Merrick." Dunn's deputy, a raw-boned man with a week's worth of stubble, spat into the snow. "Papers don't mean nothing when they're stolen." "I've seen them myself," Elias insisted. "Notarized by the territorial clerk. This is her grandfather's land." "There's a bounty," Dunn said flatly. $500 for her return to Fort Garland. She broke custody during a legal relocation. The cabin door creaked open behind Elias. Tyann stepped out, wrapped in her wool blanket, chin held high. "I will not go back," she said. "My son died on their march. I choose my own path now." Dunn dismounted, boots hitting the snow with a soft crunch. He pulled a set of iron shackles from his saddlebag. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "You ain't putting those on her," Elias growled, stepping forward. The second deputy's hand dropped to his holster. "Watch yourself, mountain man." Tyann moved closer to Elias, her voice low but firm. "This land remembers its people. I will not wear chains here." Dunn advanced with the shackles. "Last warning, both of you." Everything happened at once. Elias raised his rifle. Dunn lunged forward. Tyann grabbed a burning branch from the morning fire. The raw-boned deputy's revolver cracked like thunder in the hollow. White-hot pain exploded in Elias's left shoulder. His rifle tumbled into the snow as he staggered backward. Through the haze of agony, he saw Tyann swing the burning branch at Dunn, forcing him back. but the second deputy circled around, tackling her from behind. "No!" Elias tried to push himself up, but his arm wouldn't work. Blood spread across his shirt, turning the fabric dark. Dunn knocked the burning branch away and grabbed Tyann's wrists. She fought like a wildcat, kicking and twisting, but both deputies held her down while Dunn snapped the shackles closed. "You're making a mistake," Elias gasped, managing to get to his knees. "She's got rights to this land." "Rights?" Dunn sneered. "The only right that matters out here is the right of law and order." He yanked Tyann toward his horse. "And the law says she goes back." They dragged her through the snow, her moccasins leaving deep furrows. The deputies mounted up, keeping their revolvers trained on Elias as he slumped against the cabin wall. Tyann thrashed in Dunn's grip one last time. "Elias!" she cried out. "Don't let them bury my hope again!" Dunn swung into his saddle and pulled Tyann up roughly behind him. She sat straight-backed despite the shackles, her eyes locked on Elias until Dunn spurred his horse around. The three riders thundered away, leaving only churned snow and silence. Elias watched until they disappeared into the trees, his shoulder burning with each heartbeat. The cold began seeping into his bones as his blood stained the snow crimson. It took every ounce of strength to crawl back into the cabin. The fire had burned low, and Tyann's blanket lay crumpled where she'd dropped it. Her grandfather's deed was still safe beneath the hearthstone. But what good was a piece of paper now? Elias managed to pack snow against his wound and bind it with strips torn from his shirt. The bullet had gone clean through, but the pain was getting worse. As night fell, fever set in. He huddled near the dying fire, shivering despite the sweat on his brow. In the darkness, memories and present pain blurred together. He saw Sarah reading from her Bible, heard Tyann singing Apache hymns, felt the weight of all his failures pressing down. The relocation mission he'd led that went wrong, the families he couldn't save. And now Tyann, bound and captured, her dream of reclaiming her grandfather's land shattered. "Lord," he whispered hoarsely, "I ain't asked for much these past years. Been too ashamed, maybe. But I'm asking now." He clutched his shoulder, fighting back waves of nausea. "Give me strength. Show me the way to make this right." The fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, an owl called once, its cry echoing through the hollow like a question without an answer. Elias closed his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. All he could see was Tyann's face as they took her away, proud even in chains, and all he could hear were her last words, ringing in his ears like a challenge and a prayer. Dawn crept over the hollow, painting the snow-laden trees in pale gold. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, his shoulder throbbing with each heartbeat. The fire had died to embers, and frost rimmed the cabin's single window. Through the haze of fever, he heard footsteps crunching in the snow outside. The door creaked open. Elias tried to raise his head, but the movement sent waves of dizziness washing over him. A figure stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black preacher's coat. "Brother Wren," the man said softly in Apache, then switched to English. "The Lord guided my path to you." Elias squinted through pain-blurred eyes. "Who?" "Daniel Snowhawk." The man knelt beside him, setting down a leather medical bag. "Tyann's cousin. I've been following your trail since San Felipe Junction." Relief flooded through Elias, followed quickly by shame. "I couldn't protect her. Sheriff Dunn." "Save your strength." Daniel's hands were gentle but sure as he examined the wound. "This needs cleaning and stitching. I learned some medicine from the Quaker missionaries." He pulled thread and a curved needle from his bag. "First, drink this tea. It will help with the pain." While the bitter herbs took effect, Daniel built up the fire and set water to boil. He worked methodically, washing the wound with hot water and whiskey. The stitching hurt despite the tea, but Elias gritted his teeth and endured. "Tyann spoke of you," Elias said as Daniel tied off the last stitch. "Said you bridge two worlds." Daniel nodded, wrapping clean bandages around Elias's shoulder. "I carry my grandfather's medicine pouch and the gospel in my heart. Both speak truth." He paused, studying Elias's face. "You've changed since I last saw you, mountain man. The army scout who led relocations wouldn't have opened his door to my cousin." Elias closed his eyes, remembering Tyenn's arrival that snowy night. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Indeed. Daniel reached for Sarah's Bible, which lay open on the hearth where Tyenn had left it. She wrote something here, in the margin of Psalms. His finger traced the careful letters. "Find the captain, show them the deed, speak truth." "Captain Roberts," Elias said. "He was at Fort Garland when the original deed was filed. He'd remember." He tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain. "Easy, brother." Daniel steadied him. "You've lost blood, but yes, the captain might help. Where is the deed now?" Elias pointed to the hearthstone. "Under there. Safe." Daniel retrieved the document, examining the faded ink and notary's seal. "This could save her, but we must hurry. They'll hold her at Fort Garland only briefly before sending her south with the next prisoner transport. Then we ride today." Elias pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "You're in no condition." "I ain't asking permission." Elias met Daniel's concerned gaze. "I've spent years running from my sins. Time to face them." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. But first, let us pray." They knelt together by the hearth. Daniel's voice filled the cabin, mixing Apache and English in a prayer for strength and justice. Elias found himself joining in, the words rising from some long-buried place in his heart. Outside, fresh snow began falling as they prepared for the journey. Daniel had brought an extra horse, and he helped Elias pack what they needed: food, blankets, medicine, and most importantly, the deed. Elias's shoulder burned with every movement, but he focused on Tyenn's last words. "Don't let them bury my hope again." "The storm's getting worse," Daniel observed as they mounted up. 2 days' hard ride to Fort Garland if the weather holds. Elias pulled his coat tighter, feeling the stitches pull. "Then we'd best not waste daylight." They rode out of the hollow single file, Daniel leading the way. The snow fell harder, driven by a bitter wind, but Elias barely noticed the cold. His mind was filled with purpose, clearer than it had been in years. Every hoofbeat carried him closer to redemption, not just for himself, but for Tyenn and all those he'd failed before. "You love her," Daniel said after they'd ridden in silence for several miles. Elias didn't answer right away. The word love seemed too simple for what had grown between him and Tyenn in those few precious days. "I reckon," he finally said, "a man can't help but love what shows him the way back to grace." Daniel smiled, snow gathering on the brim of his black hat. "Then let us ride with faith, Brother Wren." "The Lord didn't bring you this far to abandon you now." They pressed on through the thickening storm, 2 figures moving steadily south through the white wilderness. Elias's wound throbbed with each step of his horse, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him that he was alive, that he had a purpose, that this time he could make things right. The deed rode safe in his coat pocket, close to his heart. Somewhere ahead, through the curtain of snow, lay Fort Garland and Tyenn. And beyond that, God willing, a future neither of them had dared to dream of just weeks ago. The chapel bells of Fort Garland tolled across the snow-covered parade ground as Elias and Daniel approached the gates. Sunday morning light filtered through heavy clouds, casting long shadows behind the soldiers standing guard. Their horses' hooves crunched in the fresh powder as they dismounted. "Halt and state your business," the sentry called out, rifle at ready. Daniel stepped forward, his black preacher's coat marking him clearly. "We've come to attend services and speak with Captain Roberts on an urgent matter." The guard hesitated, eyes moving from Daniel's clerical collar to Elias's bandaged shoulder, visible beneath his coat. After a moment's consideration, he nodded them through. Inside the fort's walls, hymn singing drifted from the wooden chapel. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs as they approached. His wound ached fiercely from the hard ride, but determination drove him forward. The deed felt heavy in his coat pocket. They paused at the chapel door. Daniel placed a steadying hand on Elias's good shoulder. "Remember, brother, speak truth with grace." Elias nodded, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. The congregation stood singing "Amazing Grace," their voices filling the small space. Wooden pews held a mix of soldiers and townspeople who had made the journey for Sunday worship. At the front, Captain Roberts stood beside the chaplain, his dress uniform gleaming in the lamplight. Sheriff Dunn sat near the back, and his hand instinctively moved to his gun belt when he spotted them. Elias met his gaze steadily, then walked straight down the center aisle. The singing faltered and died as people noticed the newcomers. Captain Roberts stepped forward, frowning. "This is highly irregular." "Sir," Elias interrupted, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I come seeking justice before God and man." He withdrew the deed from his coat and held it high. "This document proves Tayen's right to her grandfather's land. She's being held here unlawfully." Murmurs rippled through the congregation. Sheriff Dunn stood up. "Now see here, Wren, let him speak." Captain Roberts raised a hand, silencing Dunn. He studied Elias with sharp eyes. "I remember you, Scout Wren. You served under my command 5 years ago." "Yes, sir. And I remember when this deed was filed." Elias stepped forward, laying the document on the chaplain's lectern. "You were there that day. You witnessed it yourself." The captain picked up the deed, examining the faded ink and official seal. More townspeople were filtering in now, drawn by the commotion. The chapel grew crowded as people pressed forward to see. Daniel moved to stand beside Elias. "If I may speak, Captain." He opened his Bible. The book of Proverbs tells us, "Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." The territory's own laws recognize properly notarized deeds, regardless of the holder's race. "That paper's worthless," Dunn spat. "She's wanted for questioning about raids near Fort Lyon." "Those raids happened while she was in my cabin," Elias countered. "I'll swear to it before God and this congregation." Captain Roberts held up the deed to the light. "This seal is genuine. I remember this filing now. The grandfather was a scout for us in '68, saved my patrol from a blizzard." He turned to Sheriff Dunn. "What evidence do you have linking her to any raids?" Dunn's face reddened. "She matches a description." "Of what? An Apache woman?" Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. "How many mothers and daughters have you arrested on such thin claims?" The chapel had grown very still. Even the children were silent, sensing the weight of the moment. Outside, the fort's bell tolled the hour. "Bring her here," Captain Roberts ordered. "Let her speak for herself." 2 soldiers hurried out. Minutes later, they returned with Tayen between them. She walked with dignity despite her bound hands. Her eyes found Elias's, and something passed between them. Recognition, trust, strength. "Remove those restraints," the captain commanded. As a soldier untied her, Roberts held out the deed. "Do you know what this is?" "My grandfather's paper," Tayen said clearly. "The one he traded 30 horses to file properly. The one that speaks his dream of a place where his children's children could live in peace." She stood straight and proud, her voice carrying to every corner of the chapel. "I have harmed no one. I seek only what is mine by law and birth, the hollow valley where clean water flows, the place where I can teach children to walk in both worlds with honor." Captain Roberts studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'm inclined to delay any transfer orders pending a full review of this deed and its implications." He turned to Sheriff Dunn. "Unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, she's free to go." Dunn's hand clenched on his gun belt, but he said nothing. The law was clear, and too many had witnessed this moment. "The Lord's house has seen truth spoken this day," the chaplain said into the silence. "Let us pray for wisdom and reconciliation." As heads bowed, Elias felt tears on his cheeks. He hadn't cried since Sarah died, but these were different tears. Not of grief, but of something being born. Beside him, Tayan stood with closed eyes, her lips moving in her own prayer of thanksgiving. The morning light streamed through the chapel's windows, touching each face in the congregation, soldier and civilian, white and Apache, all bound together in this moment of justice served and grace revealed. The fort's meeting room felt cramped with tension. Morning sun streamed through frosted windows, casting long shadows across the scarred wooden table where Captain Roberts presided. Yellowed maps and dusty land records lay spread before him like sacred texts awaiting interpretation. Elias stood near the back wall, his wounded shoulder throbbing, watching as Tayan sat straight-backed in a simple wooden chair. Daniel remained close to her side, his Bible resting in his lap. Sheriff Dunn paced near the door, boots creaking with each turn. "Let's begin with the territorial surveys," Captain Roberts announced, unrolling a large map marked with careful grid lines. His fingers traced the boundaries of the Hollow Valley. According to these army maps from 1865, the land in question was indeed designated for settlement under the Homestead Act. Dunn stepped forward, jabbing a finger at the map. "That's right, white settlement, not reservation land." "The deed predates those designations," Daniel pointed out quietly. He withdrew several carefully preserved documents from his coat. "These show my uncle, Tayan's grandfather, filed his claim in 1862 during his service as an Army scout. Everything was done according to territorial law." The captain examined the additional papers, comparing dates and boundaries. Dust motes danced in the sunlight as silence filled the room. Outside, the fort's daily routines continued. Marching feet, shouted commands, the blacksmith's hammer ringing against iron. "There's also the matter of continuous occupation," Daniel continued. "My uncle maintained that homestead until his death in 1871. The family only left when the army forced them south." Elias interrupted, his voice rough with memory. "I was there. We told them it was temporary, just until things settled down with the raids." He met the captain's eyes. "We gave our word they could return." Sheriff Dunn's face flushed red. "That was different times, different circumstances. You can't expect—" "We expect the law to be honored," Daniel said firmly. "The same law that protects every homesteader's claim. The same law that says a properly filed deed holds true unless formally voided." Captain Roberts nodded slowly, studying another document. "According to these records, no official voiding ever took place. The land was simply redistributed during the general resettlement." The room grew still. Tayan, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying the weight of generations. "We only ask to live where our blood remembers." The simple truth of her words seemed to fill the space. Even Dunn stopped pacing, though his jaw clenched tight. Captain Roberts sat back in his chair, studying Tayan's face. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of the deeper justice at stake. He squared his shoulders and cleared his throat. "The law must serve all equally, or it serves none truly," he declared. "While there are ambiguities in this situation, the fundamental facts are clear. The original deed was properly filed and never legally voided. The claim predates current settlement designations." He straightened the papers before him. "Therefore, I am ruling that the deed remains valid and enforceable. The Hollow Valley belongs to Tayan by right of inheritance." Sheriff Dunn slammed his hand on the table. "Captain, you can't—" "I can, and I have." Roberts cut him off sharply. "Unless you have actual evidence linking her to any crimes, you will release her immediately. That's an order, Sheriff." Dunn's face worked through several shades of red, but military authority still held weight with him. With jerky movements, he withdrew Tayan's confiscated possessions from his coat: a beaded medicine pouch, a small knife, a packet of dried herbs. "This isn't over," he muttered, dropping them on the table. "Yes, it is," Captain Roberts said firmly. "The law has spoken. I suggest you accept that fact." Tyann gathered her belongings with steady hands, tucking them carefully into her dress pockets. She rose gracefully, inclining her head to the captain. "Thank you for hearing truth today." The captain returned her nod, genuine respect in his eyes. "Go in peace, Tyann. Make something good of that land." Daniel helped her toward the door, where Elias waited. The three of them stepped out into the bright winter morning, leaving Dunn's frustrated presence behind. Tyann swayed slightly, the strain of the past days finally showing in her face. Elias moved to support her, his good arm gentle around her shoulders. "You did it," he said softly. "You held on to hope." "We did it," she corrected, including both men in her tired smile. "The Hollow has its family back." They walked slowly across the parade ground, past curious onlookers and respectfully nodding soldiers. Their horses waited at the fort gates, steam rising from warm flanks in the cold air. The mountains rose behind them, blue and eternal, white peaks catching the morning sun like beacons guiding them home. The mountain hollow stirred with new life as March winds swept away winter's grip. Patches of rich earth emerged from melting snow, dark and promising beneath the weathered cabin walls. Elias and Tyann worked side by side, their breath visible in the crisp morning air as they lifted fresh-cut logs into place. "Hold steady now," Elias called, muscles straining as he guided a beam into position. Tyann braced it from below, her strong hands sure and capable. The wood settled into place with a satisfying thunk. Each day brought subtle changes. Snowdrops pushed through lingering drifts near the cabin's foundation. The creek ran fuller, its voice growing stronger as ice released its grip. Inside, the cabin took shape around them. New floor planks, tighter chinking between logs, a proper stone hearth to replace the old collapsed one. The first children arrived with the spring equinox. 2 families from the nearby reservation brought them on horseback, 4 bright-eyed youngsters eager to learn. Tyann welcomed them with warm cornbread and stories told in both Apache and English, her voice gentle as she shared parables from the worn Bible Elias had given her. "See how the mustard seed grows?" she would say, leading them to the newly tilled garden plot. So small at first, but with faith and good soil. The children's hands dug eagerly into the earth, planting hope one seed at a time. More families came as word spread. Soon the hollow rang with young voices learning the rhythms of growing things, when to plant, how to read weather signs, which wild plants could heal. Elias found himself teaching too, showing older children how to mend tools and build straight fences. One quiet evening, as sunset painted the cabin walls gold, Elias worked at carving words into a fresh-cut crossbeam. His knife moved slowly, deliberately, each letter deep and true. Where the past is honored and the future is grown. Tyann watched from her rocking chair, sewing a quilt made from scraps of old clothing, pieces of memory stitched into something new and whole. They had no paper marriage, no legal bonds between them. But something deeper had grown in this valley, something built of shared purpose, mutual respect, and the quiet certainty that they were exactly where they needed to be. "The children asked today if you were my husband," Tyann said softly, her needle flashing in the fading light. Elias paused in his carving. "What did you tell them?" "I said you were my partner in building dreams." Her eyes met his, warm with understanding. They seemed satisfied with that. He nodded, turning back to his work. The hollow held them both now, this place of second chances and renewed faith. Together they had made something neither could have built alone. A legacy not of blood, but of hope, taking root and growing strong. The August sun hung low over the hollow, painting everything in honey gold light. The steady thunk of an axe rang through the clearing as Elias guided young Thomas's hands on the handle. "That's it, boy. Let the weight of the head do the work," Elias instructed, watching the 12-year-old's determined face. "Ain't about strength, it's about patience and finding the right spot." Thomas nodded, his dark eyes focused on the grain of the wood. The axe came down clean, splitting the log perfectly. Pride bloomed across the boy's face as he looked up at Elias. Across the yard, Tayen moved between neat rows of corn and beans, her skirt brushing against the tall stalks. Her hands worked steadily, checking leaves for signs of trouble and gathering the day's vegetables into a worn basket. The garden had flourished under her care, providing food for their growing family of learners. The sound of hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Daniel Snowhawk rode into the hollow, his pack horse laden with burlap sacks and wooden crates. Children emerged from various corners of the property, rushing to greet him. "Brought some gifts from the mission," Daniel called out, dismounting with grace. "Books for learning, seeds for next spring's planting." His gentle smile took in the scene. The thriving garden, the well-maintained cabin, the children gathered around him with eager faces. As evening settled over the hollow, they shared a meal of fresh cornbread and garden stew. Prayers were offered in both Apache and English, voices rising together in gratitude. Laughter rippled through the group as Daniel shared stories from his circuit-riding adventures. Later, after the children were tucked into their pallets in the newly built sleeping shed, Tayen and Elias sat on the cabin's porch. Stars pricked the velvet sky above them, countless as desert sand. The creek's song mingled with the chirp of crickets and the soft whisper of pine needles in the breeze. Tayen's hand found Elias's in the darkness. "I remember what I said that first night." She spoke softly. "About giving you sons." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "I never gave you sons from my womb, but maybe I gave you 100 through love." Elias's weathered fingers tightened around hers. No words were needed. Together they watched the stars wheel overhead, their shared silence full of understanding. The promise made in desperation had transformed into something far richer than either could have imagined, a legacy built not of blood, but of hearts joined in purpose. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.